everyone. Ariel Adams here with Superlative Podcast. Please listen to aBlogtoWatch's other podcasts, aBlogtoWatch Weekly, where we talk about the latest watch news and reviews. Today on Superlative, my guest is Peter Chong. He's a veteran collector, founder of a publication called Deployant, and someone who I've known for a long time. Peter, welcome.
Thank you.
So I had the pleasure of seeing you here in Los Angeles in my backyard quite recently. You were part of the event for the Urban Jurgensen brand relaunch. And yet somehow, I don't know how this is, and tell me if you think this is a shame, but I have not been to Singapore yet. How is it that I've been doing this for almost 19 years now, and I haven't been to Singapore yet? It's weird, right?
It is weird. You should come.
I've never said
come
no.
Last year during the I Am Watch thing.
Well, that's the thing. I've never said no. I'm someone that I say yes to almost every trip well, that's not true. Not every trip, but I don't just turn down things, right? But for whatever reason, I've been invited to every other place around Singapore, Japan and Hong Kong and China and parts of the Middle East like Dubai, but not Singapore. Eventually I have to do it, right? Like Singapore.
Just come for a holiday. We'll take you around. We'll show you some stuff.
Which is easy because apparently it's small and you can do that pretty quickly, right?
Yeah. Except it's quite far away from LA. It's an 18-hour flight if you take the direct flight on Singapore Airlines.
Now, there's also a somewhat positive side that I haven't been to Singapore yet. And what I mean by that is it's almost like the fantasy of it, the myth of it may be more impressive than the actual place. Because to me, Singapore was this strange society where everyone seemed to love watches, inexpensive watches to the most expensive watches. And yes, Singapore has a lot of money and a lot of intelligent people, but I still couldn't quite figure out what is it about this specific place that seems to be such a hub of watch love. And you're not the first person from Singapore that I've had on the show, but maybe what's your take? Why this somewhat older than 50-year-old country has this incredible relationship with timepieces? What's your answer?
We're 60 years old this year. So it's, very, very young country. I think a combination of reasons. The first one is that access to the internet. The internet has helped a lot. The ability to have a common language in English is, I think, critical. If you look at the neighboring countries, other than Malaysia, Indonesia, for example, Thailand, which are big watch markets actually. I wouldn't say they don't speak English, but they're not comfortable speaking English or consuming information in English, whereas it's natural here in Singapore. So that's an advantage for us. The disposable income in Singapore is quite high. The GDP per capita, I think, is number 3 or number 4 in the world. It's higher than the United States. It's higher than Switzerland. I think this year it's nearly $100,000+ US per capita per year. So it's quite high. And therefore, and also some things are quite expensive. Cars, for example, are incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
And instead of spending on cars, some people save the money and they spend on watches. And it's also maybe I'm wrong. I'm not so sure about this, but I seem to feel that it could be perhaps an Asian thing, that we treasure possessions. We treasure being obsessed. So it's a good trait, positive trait, to be kind of obsessed over something, over a hobby, and it's accepted as quite normal and not abnormal that you are obsessed and you are kind of like single tracked on.
So are you saying there's a place in the world where nerds are? Are you saying there's a place in the world where nerds are appreciated?
Well, I think nerds are being appreciated much more now than previously.
No, it sounds like there's hope for me. That's good.
I think people don't look down at obsessions. People who are obsessed with things, I'm not 100% sure of this. There's no scientific proof of this.
Let me ask you this.
Feeling.
You're in Singapore and you're in in public, and you see someone who has a watch you want to comment on. In most places around the world, it's a somewhat weird thing to just mention another person's watch unless you know them or at a watch event. Is that okay to do in Singapore? Is it socially acceptable to just comment on a stranger's timepiece?
It's not common. It's not common. But
no,
if you
it's not.
do,
Okay.
But if you do approach somebody and ask about the watch. Most people will oblige and just chat away, because also I think we can put aside this thing that because Singapore is very, very safe. People don't have their antennas up and say, oh, if this guy noticed my expensive watch, he's going to rob me. That feeling doesn't come.
Interesting. Yeah. So I'm hearing three interesting things. One, the money to afford watches. Okay. Mm-hmm. Two, English. And I didn't actually think about this before, but it makes a lot of sense that unless you speak one of a small number of languages, and I'm pretty sure it's English, German, and French, basically a lot of watch information is inaccessible to you. Like, it's just, there's not a lot of sophisticated stuff written in another language. Maybe some Italian, but really outside of Europe and in America, you really wouldn't be able to understand it in native language.
Agreed. And in fact, even then, it has eroded. If you look at publications now, for example, in Europe, a lot of them are in English. Monochrome is in English, Fratello is in English. They don't do it in their own national language. Of course, if they do it in Dutch, there will only be a population of 3 million or 4 million people who will be consuming their content. Yeah.
And then you said sort of a safe place to be a collector where people aren't worried about theft and things like that. So I think that's actually a very positive sign. It sounds like if more places had those qualities, then more places would be as into watches as Singapore, that it's nothing special about the region or the people or the culture. It's just really that these factors exist where it's rare to find that combination.
And also it has existed for quite a while. So we were one of the first to kind of really embrace the independence when they first came out maybe 25 years ago or almost 30 years ago. This was a hotbed for the independence in those days. They made a lot of inroads into the market here, and people were preparing to spend, even in those days, $100,000, $150,000 on a relatively unknown brand. Whereas in many, many more conservative countries around us, for example, in Thailand and Indonesia, where they are big collectors, it's basically the big brands, Rolex, Patek, Vacheron, who are making the deals all along, and they are a bit more conservative. And over the years, we have also developed a thought leadership that these countries actually look to Singapore and say, "Oh, what are these guys doing?" And maybe we can try some of the things that they are trying.
Interesting.
And we see a similar kind of pattern, I guess, in Japan. But Japan is a closed society, so only Japanese. Yeah. Although many Japanese do speak English, but a lot of them are really uncomfortable, and they prefer to consume information in their own native language. Yeah, and also a little bit in Hong Kong. I'm a bit surprised that Hong Kong, being a colonial province, country.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to call it.
I'm not sure what to call it either. Place for a long time has not got much more acceptance of English as a language because the local language is still quite strong. Cantonese is being spoken. If you go to an event, for example, in Hong Kong, most people speak Cantonese, whereas in Singapore, most people speak English. And in fact, not most people, everybody speaks English. It's hardly you can find, except for certain pockets of special events where they may speak Mandarin. But that's the only one I see, though. Yeah.
We just recently did a big interview of the aBlogtoWatch audience, and one of the questions that we asked that stands out was about how many languages people speak. And I've asked this question in the past before, but I always keep asking to see how it evolves. And I think it's fair to say that the majority of people that are aBlogtoWatch audience members speak more than one language. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really going to what you're saying, that unless English happened to be their native tongue, if English wasn't something that they also spoke, chances are that they probably weren't going to have access to the information. And I really hadn't thought about that too much until now. So thank you for adding another piece to the puzzle for me.
Yeah, and also almost everybody in Singapore speaks 2 or 3 languages.
Yeah. Yeah, that totally makes sense. So I want to flash back to an era that I was around, but I wasn't in Singapore, and I think that was very special then. And this is, I'll call it the early 2000s. Mm-hmm. And this is the era when the first wave of independence came out. This was sort of just after companies like Franck Muller were doing really well, and Harry Winston was doing its Opus thing under Max Booster, who went on to do MB&F in 2004. Yes. There was this very interesting era of let's do brand new watches that had never existed before. as you said, new brands that no one had heard of. And I remember reading about them at the time. I started getting into watches around that era, and they were nothing I could ever afford. I was in college at the time. These were close to $100,000, more than $100,000. It was all basically Ferraris on magazine covers, right? Like just sexy things you knew you weren't going to have. But you were right there where people were not only learning about it, but like the first consumers of it. Like, I'm not saying that Singapore was where it all started, but you and your fellow collectors there were amongst the first people in the planet that bought into these watches, and you really helped start a trend. I guess what I'm curious about was, what was the reaction at the time? What were people saying about it? Were they taking it seriously? Was it kind of a joke? How were they responding to the prices? Did they like the designs? Did they know what to make of them? Was it just sort of a mixed, set of opinions? Just give us a snapshot what some of the conversations were like when people were, for example, first learning about a Richard Mille, an Urwerk, or an MB&F.
I think the environment was ripe in those days. The society was already quite mature. The collecting community was already kind of like a bit, I wouldn't say fed up, but a bit saturated, I guess, with the big brands. Of course, as you start the collecting career, you will start with those big brands. You will start with some of the other brands, and eventually work your way up to Rolex, Audemars Piguet, Patek Philippe, and so on and so forth. But after you have kind of like reached that maturity where you have kind of achieved, you have a watch or two watches in some of these brands, unless you're really obsessed with a certain kind of watch. Most people would then in Singapore, then we were introduced at that time to the independents. So I guess I'm not beating my own drum too much, but a number of us started going to Basel World in those days from 1996, 97, on our own money. Of course, in those days, nobody sponsored anybody.
Yeah.
So we went, and as enthusiasts, we were kind of like being seen by the brands as kind of weird guys who because it was a trade show in those days. We have to remember that most of the people who attended were retailers. But we were some of those weird guys who will hang around and ask really extremely difficult questions, because we were really into this. We were nerdy. We were really into the weeds of how the watches were being made, how were the construction done, what was it different from other things, what were the historical aspects of it, and also because of this and this information coming back, it was flooding the market with a lot of this information. Some of it noise, some of it real valuable stuff. Telling them about, some of these nice, exciting things that we've seen in Basel. And as a result of that, some of us who went bought into some of these systems. So I, for example, met a lot of the early independents quite early in their career. So I met Philippe Dufour, Vincent Calabresi, Paul Gerber, François Paul Jean, when he was walking around carrying his suitcase of watches to be consigned, because he wasn't even confident enough at that time to be able to sell or he wasn't big enough at that time for the retailer to just buy it off him. He would consign it to a retailer, and he comes back maybe, 1 month, 2 months later. If they were sold, he paid them a commission. If it not sold, he picked the watches and took them back. And this was how Frank Muller started as well.
Yeah.
But of course, Frank Muller was maybe a generation earlier, because by the 90s, Frank was already reached the peak. He was already one of the biggest independent watchmakers in those days, and he had already captured a huge market. And Frank Muller Asia was one of the key markets where he managed to make a lot of inroads. But of course, his formula was based on celebrities. I don't know whether you know the story of how he got his first client, but and I don't know how much of it is true, but this is what I hear, that Frank Muller himself in the early days was also walking around consigning watches. And one of the places that he went to was actually Chrono Passion in Paris.
Paris, right.
He left the watches there. The next day, Elton John came in, saw the watches, loved it, and said, okay, I want to order 100 of this, because it's going to be gifts for my birthday party next month or a couple of months down the road, or 6 months. I don't know. I don't know the length of period as well. And also, of course, this story is not verified. I just heard this story. Just thought it'd be quite interesting to repeat. And of course, he said yes, and that's how it started. Because then Elton John gave these watches as gifts to to people who came, his guests who came for his birthday party, and all of them being celebrities would wore them and then kind of like fed the fire. And it worked here as well. It's in the same way, in much the same way. Yeah. So that kind
it's
of
always an
of
influencer,
method,
right?
kind of, yeah. It's kind of like super influencer. Not really the kind that we know of today with 600,000 Instagram followers and probably know nothing about watches, who then asked for quite a lot of stuff. But this was the reverse. He actually bought the watches and gave them away as gifts to his guests. So the environment was kind of like that in Singapore at that time. So Frank Muller was already a big deal in those days, and then came all these new guys. At the same time, more corporate people also came in. Langan Zone, for example, came in 1998, 99, also trying to muscle themselves in. But of course, in those days, we had the presence of Gunther Blumlein, who was kind of another big
personality,
big industry giant in those days, equal, for example, to Nicholas Hayek Sr. for reviving the Swiss watch industry and being a very, very far-sighted and manager, knowing how to blend tastes with teasing, with future plans, with products and stuff like that. So the environment was just ripe, and we just took it in. And of course, as the prerequisite was that people had disposable income. And this would have meant nothing if people did not have disposable income. In those days, for example, in the late 90s and the early 2000s, the market, for example, in China was totally different because people did not have disposable income in China. And therefore, there was no ability to consume these expensive products. But in Singapore, it was kind of like a perfect storm where you have all the ingredients in place. And so it took off. And once it's embraced, the retailers at that time also saw that, this is an opportunity. And the Hourglass made the first big independent show, perhaps in the world, I guess. It was called Tempest. 2 years later, they repeated it with, or 2 years, I'm not quite sure how many years. We can look that up. A couple of years later, they did another show called Tempest 2, which then brought even more independence into Singapore. And that's when a lot of the collectors that are active today and dreaming to be active today or dreamt to be active in those days, came into direct contact with many of these people. So Dufour came, Roger Smith came, Calabresi came, and all these people came, and they met. It was a public event where you didn't have to pay a fee to get in. So a lot of people went and they met with these people and got influenced by them, by us, by everybody. Another interesting fact is that timezone.com, which was one of the first internet forum sites for watches in the world, started in Singapore. And that was probably mid-90s. It was started by a Rolex dealer who wanted to sell Rolex watches, actually. And of course, even now, as it was then, Rolex found out about it and told him that if you sell one single watch, you will lose your dealership. So he panicked, and after he registered all these assets, right? In those days, internet was still quite new. He registered all this. He went to the university students and said, "What can we do with this?" And they said, "Why don't you make it a forum?" And which is what happened. And so the first few years in which timezone.com existed as a server in Singapore, ran by this former Rolex dealer, because he relinquished his Rolex dealership when he retired. And it was ran here until I guess it's too early for you. You're too young. I
remember these stories. Keep going.
There was this incident called the Bomber, where somebody came into the website and caused the servers to crash on a denial service. But in those days, it was not called that, and the server went down for months, actually.
Wow.
1.5 months. Yeah. And those of us who were very active in those days, it was a small group at that time, maybe 50 people around the world. And we of course managed to connect outside by email and stuff like that. And when the server got back, it was purchased by Paris 1925, which is a brick and mortar shop in San Francisco owned by Richard Page.
Yeah.
And then he took it, and then the rest, I guess, is more I guess, more modern history, which most people would know.
So Richard, I know, and Richard's been on the show. So he actually used to do some writing for aBlogtoWatch. So I knew the story since Richard Page picked it up. The one before, you sort of helped fill in some of the gaps for me.
Yep.
And so I hear two other interesting things about Singapore. And again, I need your confirmation here. One is that the online community, especially the forum community, really sort of started there. That was really the epicenter. Obviously, there's some people around the world, but it's really the epicenter. And two, one of the things that seems interesting is I'll call it the watch collector group, seemed to also start in Singapore. Whereas there was watch collectors in other parts of the world, the ones before the internet were, at least in my view, mostly solo. Very few of them had any other watch friends. The people that maybe were their watch friends were if they knew the watchmakers they were buying stuff from or the salespeople. They didn't have, there wasn't a social hobby. But something about maybe it's the compact size and the sort of, friendly, safe attitude around Singapore, but something made the watch collector group possible to start there. Obviously, it was inevitable, but what was it about how Singapore is that made it obvious that these groups would start there? Or am I wrong? Did the group start somewhere else and you guys
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. I started the first get-together for timezone.com way back, partly because Singaporeans are obsessed with two things, food, eating, and shopping. So shopping comes with, watches comes with shopping, and therefore it's easy for us to get together in a meal. So it's very easy to organize, for example, dinner, lunch, drinks, whatever. It's very, very easy. And I did the first one. The first one was first time zone dinner was actually done by ourselves. We paid for the dinner ourselves. But finally, we managed to get a sponsor who then paid for all the wines. And that was Rolf Schneider from Ulysse Nardin. So that was the first get-together by an internet group worldwide. And we had people coming into Singapore for that event.
What year was this? Do you know?
I can't remember, but I think must be 99, 98.
Okay.
I do have the article is still live on timezone.com, and I still have a copy of the menu. Which, if I find it, I will scan it. I'll send it to you. Then maybe you can show it.
I remember this, Eric, because when I was getting into this, that's what we had. We had the forums. It was Time Zone, and there wasn't too much stuff. There was Watch You Seek. There's just not that much stuff out there. And I remember
these sprang out from Time Zone.
Yeah, that's Holstera Purist and the Purist Pro. That's a whole other funny set of drama, right?
Yeah, another yeah.
But again, it's the early. Yeah, definitely need to give those guys credit. And a lot of those guys, that started to have a more of a California element to it as well. So my backyard here. But I think what's so interesting is that I remember these pictures, these long photo essays of like watches and food at dinners. And I was always wondering, what is this all about? So it's funny to hear that was just what people like to do there. And I was always like, am I only allowed to talk about watches if I'm also shooting it with food? Like I always thought it was really funny things were inherently connected. And I was always thinking like, are they worried about getting the watches dirty? Because they're eating with their hands. Like, how do they prevent the watches from getting?
No, we don't eat we don't eat with our hands. No.
Well, you know what I mean. When you're eating, you're just you're handling the watches with their hands, obviously. So I just thought logistically, I never figured out. But you're right. It's obviously the social thing.
So three things come together quite well here. Photography, taking pictures of watches.
Yeah.
In those days, we were called scans, and literally, I actually have. In the early days, I actually bought a flat top scanner. You put the watch on top and you literally scan it. You get a huge image though, and then you posted it. So photography, food, and drinks, I guess, and watches. These were the three things, and So somehow it caught on very well.
When did it start to get so big that? I guess you could say there was more of a corporate element. These things inevitably get ruined by size, by egos. It still seems that there's a friendliness about it, but I've seen the evolution of the watch group grow, especially in the United States and things like that. It's a cautious area. There's a lot of egos involved. Yes. Oftentimes there's like a battle for the alpha leader. Yes. These groups always splinter. None of them ever get big enough to really be in other cities. I know Red Bar has tried, but really like without, Adam Craniotes, a friend of mine, It's not the same thing. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, he is that thing. I don't understand why you'd go to a... Anyways, so talk a little bit about the evolution of these watch groups if you've seen it, because I've seen that they hit a lot of size caps. Look, the positive thing is that this has become a social hobby, and being able to make and maintain friends around this has only been good for the watch industry. I mean, honestly, that's been good. With that said, I think that the brands seem to feel that these little groups can manage themselves, and the reality is I still think they need professionals like you and like me to create the hobby, like the magazines, like the formal groups, because I don't think that these happen ad hoc, and I don't think that's positive. Anyhow, you've been in the groups longer than me. Tell me what you've seen as the evolution, and what is the sort of status quo of the watch group today?
I think you're roughly right. You got it. I think at some point the group becomes big enough that it kind of kills itself. It poisons itself. As you said, there are a lot of egos involved, and more than usual, because the hierarchy is not so clear cut. It's not like a company where it's very clear cut who's the boss. Here it's not. People are fighting and jostling for leadership. Plus, it's a passion business. So most of us are not in it for the money. We're in it because we love something, and because you're passionate about something, it tends to get it can not always, but it can tend to get nasty sometimes, because then egos are involved, people are bruised, emotions are involved, and because of that, groups almost never tend to become too big. When they become too big, they destroy themselves, and then they break out, they splinter off, and they become many groups. So when Facebook first started, I don't know when, maybe mid 2010s or something like that, there were huge Facebook groups as well here. I
think it was 2007. Around that.
Yeah, something like that.
Maybe,
I'm not exactly sure. But for example, there's a huge Rolex collector group in Singapore. It's 10,000 people. And of course, there were so many fights and so much difficulty in moderating that it split into many groups. It's called SG Rock. It's still around, but it's a completely different animal today. But it's split into maybe 10 groups, and then each one has got its own flavor, I guess. Because in the end, you still want to be in a group where you feel comfortable, you feel at home, you feel recognized. And that it's kind of like, if you're in a group with 10,000 people, you are just faceless. And unless you are just a lurker, that's not what most people, not what the people want to participate want. Maybe you're a lurker, and there are a lot of these people. They just love and just see and read. Then those groups are good. Yeah. And even in groups like timezone.com, which became very large, at one time, Timezone had 10 million visitors per month, unique visitors per month. So it's quite big. Of course, it's worldwide. Then you also kind of like start to disintegrate and deteriorate, because you can't build relationship with 10 million people. It's not possible. And that's on top of what we would have done. We did in the early days of Timezone, where we had Timezone dinners in Basel. But the problem is that the organizers then later on began to have problems with people not paying, people signing up and then not turning up, people turning up and not paying, and people quarreling about how much they should be paying and all that kind of stuff. And then in the end, nobody wanted to organize it anymore. So it just kind of died by itself. Of course, Basel was also dead. And then many of the people, the participants like us, who were kind of the early leaders of the groups, became in a way professional. You know what I mean? We became part of the trade. We became journalists. We became people recognized by the brands and solicited by the brands. And therefore, we were then doing real work rather than just being a pure hobby. And we then moved in certain directions because of the influence of some of these forces. A lot of the early work that I did with the brands, for example, almost all the work I've done for example, Lange, it's been done for free. I didn't collect a single cent.
The brands have this track record of getting a lot of free help from enthusiasts and fans. I don't know when they first learned this. Probably the first time that a celebrity chose to wear one of their watches and to help business. I don't know if this was hundreds of years ago or whatever. But the watch industry has always found that they can leverage someone's passion for business help. They did it with your generation, my generation, the newest generation. It's kind of a sad ongoing thing. And we come in kind of bright-eyed and optimistic and friendly. We want to give so much of ourselves. You've given a huge amount of yourself to the watch industry. So have I. Others people have as well, no doubt. And the industry is ready to take and take and take and take, but it's like they almost expect that there's going to be another generation of us who buy into them, and they don't necessarily feel like they need to share back. And if to a degree, if they just expect it and they take it for granted, I get it. But you sort of notice that they're always out there very happy to absorb someone's enthusiasm with really no interest in true reciprocity, right?
Yes, absolutely agree.
And that's a difficult thing to stomach. I think that everyone who's in our role figures that out eventually. Some people that stops them dead in their tracks. When they realize that, they're like, I'm out of this industry. But a lot of people maintain. I think it's because, at least for me, I love the product.
Yes,
nice watches make me happy. Yeah. But, you could leave a lot of the people, right? And you could leave a lot of the business models and a lot of the habits and things like that for yourself. I mean, maybe it's just as simple as you like watches, but what's kept you into the hobby despite a lot of the, emotional blows, which again, there's nothing wrong with. I've had them as well, but I'm just imagining you've been in this long enough. You've seen enough of those personalities. There's been ego hits from time to time.
Yes, a lot. Some of them quite big.
Yeah.
But I'm in it because, in the first place, of course, I love the watches. I love the products. Somehow it's just kind of already ingrained into my life. And it's very difficult to cut it out. And I in a way, I really enjoy the people. I like meeting people. I like the collectors. I like talking about watches. We can talk about watches like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Some people, for example, finish their stint in Basel World or Watches Wonder. I say, I'm not going to talk about watches for a week. But for me, I never felt that. On the train going from Basel to Geneva in those days, right, where Basel World and Geneva and watches and SIHH were kind of like two separate events, but separated by a day. On the train traveling between, we were still talking watches. On the plane coming back, we were still talking watches. So I don't understand that's why some of these journalists, they say, oh, I have to switch off for a week because I'm just totally saturated with watches. For me, I don't have that feeling. So for me,
I've never had it either.
So that passion with watches is all the time. It just cannot be switched off. Anytime anybody asks questions or wants to talk about watches, I'm ready to engage. And I've made many lifelong friends within the industry as well. And some of them who have already passed because we've been around long enough. A lot of lifelong friends. People like, for example, Michael Friedberg, James Dowling, and people who have passed like Hans Binden, Mike Dunn. These all have been great lifelong friends. And when we visit the countries where they're in, sometimes we even stay in the houses.
Yeah.
We've become real good friends. And we used to only meet once a year, but because of the magic of internet, we kind of like know what's happening. And call us old, but Facebook does give you that ability as well, right? You can see what your friend is doing on the other side of the world. What is he having for lunch, for dinner? Who is he meeting? Which whatever that person is doing. You kind of like get a glimpse of the life of the other person. And I think that's been a great tool. So I guess the young guys now today think that Facebook is kind of for old people like us.
Ace Jewelers of Amsterdam and German watchmaker Nomos are back with another exclusive set of 50 pieces to help celebrate the 50th anniversary of the popular and dynamic retailer of Horology. This is not the duo's first successful collaboration, with these new exclusive products being their 8th and 9th limited edition watches respectively. This time, Ace Jewelers and Nomos focus on 2 sizes in the Metro Neomatic collection, each with a distinct palette of Dutch aristocratic orange colors. For centuries, orange has signified some of the core values of Holland, including personal freedom, tolerance, pride, and overall good cheer. 2 distinct multicolor orange dials were created by the renowned designer Mark Braun for these new limited edition Metro Neomatic 35mm and Metro Neomatic 39mm models. Both of the watches contain Nomos' celebrated in-house made automatic caliber DUW 3001 mechanical movement, which are visible through the rear of the steel Metro Neomatic cases. Stylish and full of value, These are fine timepieces with a fun regional flair that can appeal to enthusiasts everywhere. With included free worldwide shipping, price for the Ace Jewelers and Nomos Metro Neomatic 50th Anniversary limited edition watches start at 2,810 euros, excluding taxes. Learn more at acejewelers.com.
Here's the thing I've seen. Even though we had slightly different tools and slightly different technology, very little has functionally changed about how watch social groups operate. And I see, again, a bunch of 20-year-olds, not 20, like in the 20s, collecting. And the thing is, they have such big egos. They think they figured it all out. They're like, we're the coolest. They want our money. We're awesome. And I love it for them. But they don't realize, like, the brands have seen guys like you time and time and time again. I think it's responsible for collectors groups to be on guard a little bit. You want to enjoy the hospitality of the brands. You want to buy watches from them from time to time. But maybe you can give the newer generation of watch collectors who have their own groups, who, again, think they have it all figured out, what are some things to look like to look out for, to be cautious of? What are some best practices? You know, from someone who has so much experience, give new watch group members some sage advice.
I think that I don't have any sage advice, but I think that the new guys coming into the hobby, it cuts two ways as well, because the PR people on the other side, on the brand side, are also new. Most of them have not been around that long. I mean, I know there are a few who have lasted throughout the time when I've been collecting, but very few. Most of them are very young and very new. So they are also experiencing this for the first time. And on the collector side, I think a lot of them are fresh faced, and they are just driven by passion, driven by interest. Some of them think that because they have read a lot, they know everything. And some of them are much more business-minded and less naive than we were in the early days. Some of them are really taking advantage and trying to make businesses out of this because they know that the brands actually do have money to spend. It's how you get to the money. Whereas in our time, we never thought of that. We never thought. In the first, for example, group visit that I made to visit a factory with a bunch of people, it never occurred to me that I could ask the brand to subsidize anything. And we were extremely happy that they bought lunch and dinners and stuff like that. Small things, right? So to the brands
never offered. That's the thing.
Really nothing.
The brands don't.
Maybe at that point in time they didn't know either. They didn't know better. They also thought, "Wow, what do we do? Should we offer? Should we do this? Should we do that?" And then they started looking at this as a business and said, "Wow, for relatively little money, you can actually get these crazy guys to do a lot of things for you." And which is what we did. So we fed on the system for a while, and then finally, some of us got wise and said, "No, look, this is going to cost money. We need to be paid because we want to be full time. We want to leave our jobs. We want to do this because when I started, I think other than print magazines, there were no professional journalists hanging around like us, in the internet and stuff like this, where you were freelance. And if you were freelance, you would be attached to a magazine, a newspaper, or something like that. And that was the kind of the old school. So we are kind of a new school, but the new school is now also getting old because now there is a new fresh school, which are people who are coming out in their 20s now, as you said. And some of these people, especially in Singapore, surprised me as well, because a lot of these collectors at 20 to 30 years old, they are still either in university or just fresh out of college. They're buying expensive stuff. They're collecting lugers, they're collecting Jiggler Coots, they're collecting independents, even like Ronald and things like that. We maintain a database because of Deployant. We maintain a database of collectors in Singapore. And surprising number of them are below 30 years old. And surprising number of them are actually buying and buying and selling watches at prices which we would dream of when I was in my 20s.
It's interesting to see that the sophistication level of consumers has increased as the availability of information has increased. And I wonder if we were at those ages where we were just getting into watches now, how it would be different for us. I know that social media being a factor totally changes things. I had to hunt for watches without having any idea if they were in demand or not, right? You remember when you read about a watch not knowing if anyone liked it? That's all you knew. It's like, someone out there is buying this. I remember all these watches that would like, the only places they ever seemed to be sold was in Japan, right? They were like made in Germany or Switzerland, sold in Japan. All I knew is there was at least one guy out there in Japan that shared my taste, right? Like, that's all I knew. Now, you get everyone's opinion. If they love it, they hate it. You see all that stuff. People get nervous about stuff that isn't universally liked, of course, which I guess is, that's part of the human condition. And then you have this insane amount of data. I think most of it is worthless, but all this like stock trader style stuff, these watches going up and down, purchase history, auction lot reports, trends, in demand, wait list times, like, I don't even know what to make of all this stuff. For me, it was simple. If something you want isn't available, go find something else that is. Yet,
exactly. That's my advice to most people anyway.
But that seems to not really be followed anymore.
I don't even see the value in buying gray market.
A gray market?
Something you want, it is not available from the authorized dealer.
Oh, see, for me, gray market was always cheaper. Now gray market means more expensive.
Yeah. Used to be gray market is cheaper. I would buy from the gray market because I can get a 20% off or 30% off, which I can't get from the authorized dealer. But now it's the other way around. Now, if you buy from gray market dealer, you're paying 2 times the price of what you can get it from authorized dealer. Of course, the wait list is a different issue, but the wait list never existed in my time. The only watch where you had kind of selling in those days, we were selling above retail. Retailers were allowed to sell above retail. The only watch which I knew was selling above retail was the Rolex Daytona. Everything else, Patek Nautilus, maybe 2-week wait, 1 month wait at the most, for the stock to come in, fresh stock to come in. And once the stock comes in, you will get your piece. It's not by allocation or no, you don't have enough spending history with us. Sorry, you can't buy this watch. Like in recent stuff where I've recommended friends who saw the watch is available to buy. And because he doesn't have enough purchase history, he cannot buy the piece. He has to buy something else to qualify to buy this piece. Kind of strange.
So I think it's important to talk about this, and I have my own opinions on it, but I want to get to the point slowly. Let's begin with this question. Do you think, and again, taking into consideration the entire industry, not just you as a buyer, not just thinking about the brands, but just taking into consideration we'll call it the sustainability of the luxury watch marketplace, is it a better thing that watches today are sold in this sort of illusory exclusivity way? They're not, they make it difficult to buy. Or is it better when we were more happy doing it, where a discount was expected most of the time, not a crazy discount, but it made you feel a little bit better, it greased the wheels, and you bought stuff. I'm still trying to understand which one was better for the actual industry long term. Do you have any opinions on that?
To me, I think the perfect situation would be that no discounts, because I think discounts are destructive to the industry. Because if you build these discounts in and you expect to have to provide a discount, if you're a retailer, you expected to give a discount to your end customer, you mark up the price anyway. So in the end, it's not making any sense. So discounts are you destroy yourself. So I think the best is to have an established list price. Don't change from it. Never change from it. But whatever you can produce are available in the market. I feel that the practice of some brands which are controlling the market by releasing pieces in more limited fashion than their production is not the right way of going ahead. But I'm not. I don't know about the economics of it, so I'm not talking in that aspect. But as a collector, I would prefer if whatever that is being produced can be purchased. And nobody's keeping stock just to play with the market and say, if I keep this watch for another 6 months, or I release 2 per month rather than the 20 I'm able to produce, I'm able to maintain a much higher price point. Or I'm able to make you buy another watch to get this piece, which I think is a very strange marketplace. I think this possibly the luxury industry is not unusual in the luxury industry, I guess, but other than the luxury industry, it's probably the only industry that, if you talk about consumer products, where you feel an obligation and you are happy to be allocated a piece, where I get to spend money with a retailer that I owe the retailer. Whereas in most situations, the retailer kind of like you are the customer, and therefore they owe your custom because you come and spend money with them.
So how did this happen? How did it become a privilege to buy a watch as opposed to a privilege that someone bought a watch from you? How did that happen?
I don't know exactly where was the turning point, but I think it's the clever manipulation of, there's this type which we have seen in the industry where at a certain point in time, the manufacturers or the manufacturers of the watches had the power and they control the market. And then that wave would wane, and then will come up with the part where the retailers will control the market by dictating terms and things like that. And then eventually the consumer will come up again. I have seen that part where the consumer is coming, and perhaps maybe you have not, because in the early days when I started collecting, the consumer was king. The customer wants to buy the watch, kind of like, okay, I've got $5,000 to spend. Do I buy Rolex? Do I buy Omega? Do I buy whatever? But today, if you go to a retailer and say, I got $20,000 to spend, they're probably going to stare you in the face and say, so what do you want? And if you say, okay, I want a Rolex Pepsi, they'll probably laugh at you. These things did not exist in those days. Today, the retailer is king. But in the previous stage, just before the retailer became king, I feel that maybe the manufacturer was the king. And the manufacturer was dictating terms, and they were releasing pieces slowly into the market. Some brands, of course, get it wrong. And those brands who get it wrong, they release too many pieces to the market, or their CEOs were probably burdened with too many SKU in their KPIs, that they dropped too many pieces to the market, and the prices dropped. And some of them are still trying to recover from those mistakes. But many of them will play it right, and I think Rolex is the prime example. I don't know exactly what they did, but probably by controlling the supply into the market, and they are able to manipulate is not a really nice word, but they're able to control the market in such a way that the demand is always slightly higher than what they can produce, or perceived to be that they're able to produce. What they are able to produce, we can see the numbers are like 1 million watches a year. Even 10 years ago, they were still like 700,000 watches a year. I remember in the early 2000s, when we did not know what numbers Rolex was producing, but we can see that they submitted 700,000 COSC certificates, which means that it must produce at least 700,000 watches, or maybe more, because they have watches which are not COSC certified in those days. Now it's a bit more clear, maybe because of the Morgan Stanley report, but I don't know how true that is. Those are also estimates, I guess.
Yeah.
But we see the latest numbers that they are making more than 1 million watches a year. And how can 1 million watches a year be quite scarce? It's all marketing, I guess. It's again a bit like iPhones, right? Somehow Apple makes it desirable that you want an iPhone, and it's probably the most successful phone in the world. More people have an iPhone than any other phone in the world, but yet it's still kind of like a desirable piece. How did that happen? I'm also not sure.
I mean, there is an answer, but it's obviously a moving target because it's actively happening. I mean, other than watch design evolving, that's been the area of the greatest evolution since at least I started in this industry, was this increasingly sophisticated attempt and variety of market manipulation. I mean, that's the right word. It's a lot of games when it comes to demand and marketing and distribution and availability and what information to release, what you price things at, the whole nonsense with auction houses to celebrities wearing it. That's the thing that it makes me the most uncomfortable, because it's one big moving target. It's like they can't just be okay saying, this is our thing, we think we're charging a fair price for it, do you like it? Like most brands just can't seem to be okay with doing that. The bigger the brands, the more they seem to want to play these games with the market. And I think we see that it works to a degree, but not for very long and not for very well. And many of them, if they sort of made it more aware what they're doing, can't be very proud of it. Like you said, the latest flavor is in encouraging consumers to buy multiple watches they don't want before they can get the one they do want. I mean, this is all types of unethical and not legal in a lot of ways, but they try to a lot of brands now, That's what they try to do. They try to capture you as a lead when you contact them, enter you into their CRM, their customer relationship management software. And then they literally, you go to certain brands, I'm not even going to name them. They're like, okay, sir, ma'am, what are the watches you like? The one you want the most? Okay. And then they have this plan where they string you along. And it's this whole game where rather than just sell you something you want, they're like, how do I plan out your customer journey and make money from you for the next 6 years?
Yeah, the retailers have become too sophisticated.
And consumers are wising up to it as normal because I think this industry is run by consumer money. And this is why I lament the era of discounting. I agree with you that there's dangers to it, but there's also dangers to brands who keep getting us to agree retail prices are good, and then they keep increasing retail prices. You can't have it both ways. You can't say that the retail price is holy and then next year decide to arbitrarily increase it. That's not holy.
I agree. I think retail prices should be based, and I think maybe I'm wrong again, but I think economic theory would say that retail pricing would stabilize at cost plus. But today,
clearly it hasn't worked out that
product,
way.
It's clearly not cost plus. A lot of the products are being sold for aspirational value, right?
So
you think that a watch is worth a certain amount of money. It doesn't matter how much you make it for. I'm going to sell it for this much.
So for me, when I got into watches were a celebratory object. You purchased them when you had a moment to celebrate yourself. And oftentimes, being offered a discount was like the final icing on the self-celebratory cake. It's like, oh, they want my business so much they're willing to give me like a little token discount just to get me over the edge. It's part of the psychology of why people buy the watches in the first place.
No, but those are not collectors.
Well,
those are not collectors, right? Those are people who buy 5 watches a year.
That's still a collector.
We're talking
5
about
watches a year is not a collector?
No, so 5 watches a lifetime, sorry.
I still think that a lot of collectors find reasons to celebrate. All I'm saying is that the shift towards thank you so much for selling me this watch means that you now have unreasonably high expectations of this watch. And that's the danger. Too many people expect too much out of their watch, if it's value retention or sex appeal or importance, that you're setting up a lot of people for failure. The expectations are too high for what these things mean because you have a bunch of people on YouTube that basically say how amazing life will be if you have these and you could resell them for a higher amount. Like there's too much lies getting people excited that I just think people are being let down too often. And that's my worry, is that people who are let down too often will abandon the hobby. And if there's anything that you and I both want, it's more people, legitimate collectors in the hobby.
Yes. But I think it's not uncommon among other things as well, because I'm also into photography, for example. The same methodology is being used, for example, to revive film photography.
I mean, make it expensive and hipstery?
Yeah, make it expensive history, get 1 or 2 very famous people to use it and see how good it is, and then make it very difficult to
I will never go back to film. Never. They will never get me to go back to film. Ever.
I'm still shooting film.
You're still. I will not, meaning I've abandoned it because I feel that digital is fine. No one will shame me into going back to film is my point. If you still like it, great. I've moved on, not going back.
Okay.
Just like I'm not driving a manual transmission car with a clutch. If you have a clutch and a manual transmission, sorry, I'm not interested.
Okay.
So now, circa 2025, you're a member of the watch media. Watch media has had an outsized importance over the last 20 or 30 years in the success of the watch industry, yet an uphill battle in trying to continue to legitimize itself. I'm continually being told on a regular basis how, in a large scale, aBlogtoWatch is really the only surviving player of independent voices. Obviously, there's some great regional players and things like that, like Deployant. What did watch media do wrong that the watch industry simply didn't quite get it? I think that there's been some fundamental mistake. I've clearly been trying to correct it, but what was watch media's main sin that made it so that it had this strange relationship with the media, with industry, where the industry wants it, but is obviously resistant to funding it?
I don't really know, though. I don't really know. I think some parts of the industry are okay with funding us, But many of the big guys are thinking that I got this response from a very large manufacturer. I shan't name them, but it's one of the big 10, let's say. Well, top of the big 10, who actually told me once that they should not be paying for anything that they do with us, advertising or featured articles or anything, because they said, you are a specialist watch magazine. If you don't write about us, who are you going to write about?
What does that even mean? Does that mean you're stuck into this? You've committed. You're going to cover us anyways. Even
Yes.
is that basically saying get your money from somewhere else?
Yeah, they're saying that we're so big that if you don't cover us, it's your problem. If you don't cover my brand and if you don't talk about my brand, you're missing out, not me.
So is that true or no? I always call BS on that. I've heard similar things like that.
I think it's BS on this, and I've actually stopped covering the brand for some time until we managed to come back again in the different set of conditions. But that's not the brand I was talking about. But yeah, I think it's not. I don't think that's true because the brands need us to talk about them. And,
I think that's another manipulation technique.
The
That's all I
outlet is,
see.
the more legitimate the media is, the more authority the media is, the better for them. But somehow they feel that no, they prefer to. I don't know how to change this around. I'm problem.
It's an active issue. I'm beyond calling it right or wrong. They obviously think it's right. I just try to understand the disconnect because this is an ecosystem. We're kind of like a supplier, but we're like a supplier they don't want to pay. They understand they have to pay their other suppliers. Our only difference is we don't do exactly what they want because if we did exactly what we want, we'd have no audience. And they don't seem to understand that. If we did it their way, no one would read us or watch us or listen to us or whatever. And so they can't be okay with us being favorable to them 80 or 90% of the time. If it's not 100% of the time, and we have, then it's like they don't understand that. And look at them when they've tried to go direct, and they're like, "Oh, we could do it." Do they ever able to replicate what we do? No, never. They have their own Instagram channels. They've started their own magazines, podcasts, collectors groups, forums. They've tried everything. Has any of it been successful without an independent voice and opinion? I would venture to say no, none of it has, or it's grossly expensive with huge amounts of ad payout to Instagram all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how to tell you. I wish I knew.
So these are like the most cost-conscious individuals in the world, yet they would overspend easily to have 100% control when they gain nothing by that. They're so afraid of negative sentiment. I've always thought that's funny. Like, okay, I can imagine I'm a brand owner and I'm reading some comments and they're like, who's that guy that doesn't like my design? Like, I should probably just ignore that. But the reality is there's people out there that don't like everything. Every Rolex article we've ever written has had negative feedback. Doesn't seem to hurt their bottom line. So other than being like hyper egotistical about fear of bad sentiment preventing sales, I just don't get what their big deal is. What do they care what we say about it as long as people learning about it?
Yep, I don't know. I understand. This brings me to an interesting conversation I had with Max Busser once. And he's not one to advertise anyway, so he doesn't spend any money. But he told me once that if everybody likes his watches, he's done something wrong. Because he's supposed to be the edgy guy whose products come out and that not everybody will like them. Only some people will like them, and that's enough. Enough people like them is enough.
But he's also someone who's not huge on negative feedback. I know Max and I love him, but sometimes he says things and I try to get him into a corner like, does that really apply to you, Max? Do you believe what you just said? Occasionally I get him to admit, oh yeah, I actually don't subscribe to that. I think it's just important to talk about it because, again, we've been doing this professionally for, multiple decades combined. And there's still these huge gaping questions in terms of what are the Swiss even thinking? What the hell do they want from us? Right? Like, why don't they see this obvious thing in front of them? And I always ask myself, like, whose communication fault is it? Is it the rest of the world for not telling their expectations to Switzerland, or is it Switzerland for not telling their expectations to the rest of the world? And increasingly, I got to say, I kind of blame the Swiss. It's not just the Swiss, it's the region. But they're the ones who I think we've identified happily engage in manipulation, happily engage in an asymmetric relationship, which is bound to lead in frustration for the other party. Yet they continue to do that. And I don't quite understand why they think that's okay. What are they so afraid of? Doing business with people that you grow with? You know, having partners that you actually share money with for multiple decades? Like, where is their fear? Because, you know, and I've learned this from a lot of business people, especially from Asia, where they say variations on the concept of, you know, a rising tide lifts all boats and things like that. This idea that if you're making money, you share the bounty, because when people work for you and also want things to be good, they help you. Whereas the Swiss, if there's too much bounty, they're like, oh, we need more of it. And if you want any bounty to begin with, they're like, are you sure? Are you sure we should give you anything? Like, they don't let you make, you know, they don't understand this idea of shared growth. They don't want any of that. They want to win, not you. And I'm still just trying to reconcile these strange conflicts of expectations and culture, because again, several decades into them being quite international with the internet and stuff like that, they're still contending with these basic problems.
I'm just agreeing with you.
You're just nodding. I know. Okay. What else could you add, right? So podcasts have become quite popular. This is sort of the last thing we have time to talk about. This is your first one, so I'm honored that you chose to come on Superlative. Thank you, Peter.
You're welcome.
But this has been an area that I think has surprised the Swiss a lot, because I remember years ago, they were like, they didn't think that non-visual media had any business covering watches. They're like, what do you mean? You know, like unless it's pictures, they thought no one's going to care. And podcasts, obviously, for the most part, it's just audio. But it's been such a popular area. This show, others, a lot of people listen to it. And I just think it's funny. And what is your opinion on podcasting becoming popular, despite the fact that you can't see any watches?
I think the podcasts become popular and stuff like that. And personally, for me, my experience with podcasts is that when I'm commuting. So when you're commuting, your focus is something else. You're focused on driving. You're focused on trying to get a train or your stop or whatever. And that's when you have the podcast in your headphones, and you listen to it and you try and learn something. That's I figure that's where most of the listeners are from. I don't think people, maybe I'm wrong again. I don't know whether people do sit down and say, okay, I'm going to spend the next 1 hour listening to this podcast, and sit down and focus and concentrate 100% of it. Some people do actually, because they actually watch YouTube videos which are 1 hour long. So maybe, but how many of them are actually having it running in the background and doing something else, cooking or something else? When you're preparing your meals, you could have a podcast running, and that counts. Positively for us, because you get a view, or you get a listen. But how actively are these people engaging? I'm not so sure. That's what, to me, I still prefer maybe I'm old-fashioned, I still prefer the forum kind of format where there is engagement. You can actually talk back. There is some form of feedback that you get. Whereas in a podcast, you probably get none. I don't know how much you get. Of course, I know you can leave comments and stuff like that. But how many people do leave comments? YouTube, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I don't get a lot of engagement on my YouTube channel, even though the YouTube channel has been growing steadily since we restarted it in November last year. We've grown. We're still very small, but we're kind of growing, and we do get some comments. For example, the recent piece that I did with Jay Leno in his garage, we have 900 comments, which is unusual for me. Yeah.
Yeah,
and
that was an exciting time.
Nonsense.
You went to visit Leno. He invited you for an audience?
Yes. He invited me because he had one of my books, which he asked, which I signed. And he said, okay, well, if you're in LA, why did you come and visit me? And I did, and he's a fantastic gentleman. So I went to visit him. He was alone in his garage. And I said, can I do a video? He said, sure, of course, anything you want. So we did the video. It's kind of like 2 takes, about 25 minutes worth of material. And by my channel standards, it's gone viral because it's like 10 times better than the next. And
so people that want to see that, they go to the Deployant YouTube channel. Is that where it is?
Yep. It's called Deployant.com. YouTube channel, yeah.
Yeah.
But a lot of people find it from other places as well, because we look from the YouTube stack, we can see that organically finding it in YouTube. But of course, YouTube promotes it because it's starting to get a lot of views, and it kind of
I'm just
multiplies
trying
itself.
to plug your stuff, man. I want people to find it.
Thanks.
The last thing I'll say is I want to hear your thoughts on the word hobby. When I started this, and for many, many years, no one, whether it was a hobbyist or the people who made the watches, ever used the word hobby. They use the word collector a lot, but they never use the word hobby. And at one point, I just realized, wait a minute, this is a hobby. No one is talking about it as a hobby. And I just started using the word hobby a lot. Why do you think they've avoided the word hobby? And do you think it's correct to define how we approach this? Again, we're someone who have made a profession out of it, but I would argue to say that we've made a profession within the watch hobby, not necessarily the watch industry.
I would think it's a hobby, but I think actively many people try not to describe it as hobby because I think when you think about hobby, it's kind of like something which is not important. But as you know, enthusiasts and collectors, it's not something which is not important. It's kind of like it can actually be the whole purpose of your life.
Yeah.
Of course, that's getting a bit extreme, but to some people, it is, right? It's kind of like what they think of when they're at work, and it's a bit like an addict. You get addicted to it, and then you constantly want to get that buzz, either by talking about watches, buying watches, being with people who are interested in the watches, and it's kind of being addicted to it. And sure, you do other things. You be with a family, you work, but all of it comes back to feeding this hobby or this thing, this addiction.
It's a lifestyle.
I think addiction, of course, has got negative
you're describing a
connotations.
lifestyle, really.
Yeah. Addiction has got negative connotations, so I think the brands avoid them. And therefore, collector is the next best thing. And collector also suggests that you buy more than one, which is good for them. And to me, actually, in my experience, knowing collectors for so many years, the collecting profile follows a kind of a curve. At some point, people will be buying 6 to 10 watches a year, which is kind of a lot if you're not a collector, or a lot if you're not a hobbyist or enthusiast or interested in watches, because most, as we said just now, most people buy maybe 5 watches a year to mark important events in their life. Graduation, getting married, or whatever, children, being born and stuff like that. Or retiring towards the end of your career. So maybe 5, 6 watches, nice watches a year. We don't talk about cheap watches. 5, 6 nice watches a year. But to many collectors, 5, 6 watches a year, a lifetime, sorry, just now. 5, 6 watches a year is not uncommon, especially in the heat of collecting.
Oh yeah.
There were times when I started collecting after the initial period, I was kind of like buying 10 watches a year. And these are not really exactly cheap watches, right? You've been there. A lot of us have been there.
Hell yeah.
Because it's part of the nature of addiction, right? You get addicted to it, and then you keep consuming, get obsessed with it. And as I said earlier on, the Singapore mentality is such that it's not looked down. Being obsessed with something other than work and family is kind of like considered normal and in a way good. And therefore it feeds this obsession as well. But at a certain point, of course, you get saturated. And then you say, oh, come on, I got 60, 100 watches. What am I going to do with all of them? I don't even got 2 wrists. And most of us don't even wear 2 watches at the same time, even though we're in the business. 1 watch is enough for me most of the time, except if I go to an event and I need to kind of like talk to many more people and show watches, things like that, not more than 1. But most of the time we wear 1 watch. And why do you have 50 watches, 100 watches? And a lot of us have 50, 100 watches, which are, I'm not talking about $50, $100 watches. We're talking about substantial investments. So after that, you get tired of it and you say, okay, I'm going to stop. And for people like me, I stopped collecting and buying, but I still continue to engage in the business, to talk to people, to kind of promote and still share some of this passion. Because as I think we did talk about this when we were in LA, deploying is not a business for me. I don't look at it to make enough money to feed the family and all that, because I've retired. And this is it's a business, so it needs to make money. It's a company. It needs to make money. It needs money to keep the lights on. But we don't depend on it to feed our families. And therefore, it's a kind of a hobby business. We do it because passion. We do it because we want to share the interest that we have. We think that it's a good thing. Maybe we are wrong and we are stupid, but we think that collecting watches is a good thing, and we want other people to do the same thing. And therefore, we do this. A lot of the stuff we do don't see immediate benefits. For example, in our website, we find that the highest value, the highest reads are based on certain brands or certain news. Long form reviews, which we do quite a lot. And some of these are 2,000 word articles with 6, 7, 8 photographs, which are taken by us, detailing aspects of the watch which are discussed in detail. Those take 2-3 days to write, and they don't get that many hits. But we're still doing it because we want to create this database of reference materials. People may not read it when it comes out, but people may read it if they want to buy that specific piece or they're interested in that particular piece. Yeah, they go back and refer to it.
I've consistently found that 85% or more of people read watch reviews before they buy a watch. So it's incredibly useful stuff. Peter, we're out of time. The last thing I'll say is that I've realized that our mission is to normalize watch addiction. That's really what we want to do. We want the world to be okay with this. Maybe make people who are afraid to come out, say, I am a watch addict. I want to be around friends that can support me.
Yeah, I mean, even in the early days, I think Richard Page was the one to coin, or one of those guys was the one to coin this term, watch idiot savant.
Yeah. We had. I think we still have some. We had these shirts that said. Anyways, we're over time, sir. We'll just have to bring you back on the show again.
Okay.
This has been the Superlative Podcast interview with Peter Chong. You can go and find his online magazine, Deployant. Peter, thank you so much.
Thank you.